Have you ever found yourself standing at a crossroads, yearning for a clear sign, something unmistakable to guide your next step, only to be met with silence? In those moments when the heavens seem quiet and the answers are nowhere in sight, we face a profound question. Can trust survive without proof? Can faith endure when the signs we long for never come? Tonight, let us explore what it means to walk forward with courage, learning to trust in the unseen, even when no sign appears. To place one's trust in what cannot be seen or measured is a task that demands a certain bravery, a kind of intellectual and spiritual courage that is not common in our age. We live in a world enthralled by evidence, by the clear and the demonstrable, where certainty is sought through proof, and faith is too often mistaken for mere belief in things that seem improbable without immediate validation. Yet, there lies a profound paradox at the heart of the human experience. The deepest truths, the things that move the soul and give life its meaning, refuse to be confined to the realm of the visible. Faith, in its truest form, does not grow from the comfort of signs or wonders, but from the daring to trust in what lies beyond them. It is tempting, and indeed natural, to demand a sign, some tangible proof that our trust is not misplaced, some token that confirms the presence and the care of the one who governs all things. This desire for proof is not in itself wrong. Even the wisest of sages and prophets in sacred history asked for signs, not out of doubt alone, but out of the human need to grasp what often feels elusive. But when such signs become a prerequisite for trust, they shift the relationship into one of calculation rather than commitment, where faith is conditional and fluctuates with the presence or absence of extraordinary confirmation. This is not the faith that leads to lasting peace or the transformation of the heart. Rather, it is a fragile thing, tethered to the unreliable winds of circumstance. The essence of faith transcends what our eyes can perceive and what our minds can quantify. It is a trust placed in a reality that does not conform to the laws of mere observation. This is not to dismiss the intellect or to forsake reason, but to recognize that reason itself finds its limits where the eternal and the invisible begin. The human intellect, brilliant and wondrous as it is, operates within the boundaries of space and time, cause and effect. Faith calls us to step beyond these boundaries, to acknowledge a dimension where these rules do not hold in the same way, where trust is not based on the visible proof of a sign, but on the quiet assurance that there is something greater, more constant, more faithful than the shifting circumstances of life. This kind of trust is akin to walking through a dense forest on a path shrouded in mist. The path itself cannot always be seen clearly. There may be no signs pointing the way, no footprints to follow. Yet the traveler proceeds, not because every step is guaranteed or every turn obvious, but because there is a confidence in the destination and a certainty that the path will not vanish beneath their feet. It is a trust that accepts uncertainty not as a threat, but as the very condition for faith to flourish. For if the path were always clear, if every step were illuminated by a sign, there would be little need for faith at all. Faith is born, rather, in the spaces between what we can know and what we hope for. When trust is placed beyond the demand for signs, it ceases to be a matter of negotiating with God through evidence. It becomes a surrender, an act of the will to believe despite not seeing, to hope despite the absence of certainty. This surrender is not a passive resignation, but a dynamic engagement, an ongoing choice to lean into the invisible presence that guides, even when the way is hidden. It is in this surrender that the believer finds a deeper peace, for it acknowledges that the foundations of trust are not dependent on shifting signs, but on the character of the one who invites trust in the first place. There is a subtle but profound shift in the soul that occurs when one embraces this kind of faith. The need for constant reassurance diminishes, and in its place grows a quiet confidence, a knowing that surpasses knowledge, a rest in the understanding that faith is a relationship, not a formula. This is the heart of the journey that is often overlooked in a culture that prizes certainty and visible proof. The invitation is to enter into a communion where trust is not earned by signs, but freely given, and where the absence of signs is not evidence of absence, but a call to deeper trust. To dwell in this faith is to participate in a mystery that cannot be fully comprehended, and yet it is precisely here that the richness of spiritual life is found. This faith nurtures the soul's growth, not by shielding it from doubt or by providing constant confirmation, but by teaching it to rely on a steadiness beyond circumstance. It cultivates a resilience that endures when signs cease and when the world seems silent. For faith without sight is not blindness, but a heightened vision, a perception that discerns the unseen realities that undergird the visible world. This kind of trust invites humility as well, recognizing that human understanding is limited and that the deepest realities may forever elude empirical verification. It requires a willingness to be vulnerable, to admit that certainty in the empirical sense is not the measure of all truth. In this vulnerability, faith finds its truest expression, not as a blind leap, but as a courageous step taken in the assurance that the unseen is nonetheless real and active. In conclusion, to trust without a sign is to live in the tension between what is visible and what is invisible, between knowledge and mystery. It is to acknowledge that faith is not a crutch for the uncertain, but the way in which the uncertain becomes meaningful. To cultivate this faith is to grow into a fuller, richer experience of the divine presence, one that does not rely on signs, but rests in the enduring truth that trust itself is the bridge to the eternal. There is a curious paradox in the life of faith. The very moments when nothing seems to happen, when the silence stretches long and the heart grows weary, are often the moments in which the deepest teaching takes place. Waiting is one of the most difficult lessons to learn, for it requires a kind of patience that goes against the instincts of our hurried world. We live in an age where immediacy is expected, where answers come quickly, and where signs are often demanded as proof before any step is taken. Yet, the spiritual journey calls us into a different rhythm, one marked not by haste, but by the slow unfolding of trust amid uncertainty. To wait is not merely to endure time passing or to tolerate absence. It is a discipline, an active posture of the soul. It is a form of teaching that shapes us, molds us, and prepares us for what lies beyond the waiting itself. The waiting is not wasted time, but fertile ground where character is grown and faith is deepened. It is in the silence and stillness that the soul learns to rest, not in what can be seen or grasped, but in the assurance of a presence that remains, even when hidden from view. This discipline of waiting is often misunderstood as a passive state, but in truth, it is a dynamic engagement of trust and hope, sustained even when all signs point to delay or absence. The struggle to wait well is ancient and universal. Throughout sacred history, those who sought divine guidance or intervention often found themselves in seasons of waiting that tested their resolve. These were not moments of divine silence for punishment or neglect, but deliberate times of formation. To wait without signs is to be invited into a space where faith must stand on its own, independent of external confirmation. This requires a surrender of the desire to control or predict the outcome, a release of the need for certainty, and a willingness to be vulnerable in the face of ambiguity. In this waiting, the soul is purified of impatience and self-reliance. It is stripped of the illusion that trust can be bought or bargained for with signs or miracles. Instead, the heart learns a new kind of courage, the courage to believe in what is not yet seen, and may never be seen in the form we expect. This courage is quietly heroic, for it demands perseverance in the absence of visible encouragement. It is a patient endurance that acknowledges the difficulty of the journey, but refuses to be undone by it. There is also a subtle joy found in waiting, a joy that is not dependent on circumstances, but arises from the very act of waiting itself. This joy is rooted in the understanding that waiting is a shared experience with the divine, a space where the soul aligns itself with a greater timing and a higher wisdom. To wait is to enter into a rhythm that is not our own, to learn to trust in a pace that transcends our desires and expectations. It is a discipline that transforms the soul, teaching it to listen more deeply, to observe more keenly, and to rest more fully in the knowledge that delay is not denial. The discipline of waiting teaches humility as well. It confronts the believer with the limits of human control and the necessity of surrender. The waiting period is a mirror, reflecting the state of the soul and revealing the areas in which trust is fragile or conditional. It exposes the places where faith clings to signs or insists on proof, gently urging the heart to let go and lean instead on the unseen hand that is ever present. This humility is not defeat, but a recognition of the true nature of faith as dependence. Moreover, the waiting cultivates an attentiveness to the small, often unnoticed ways in which care and guidance are given. When signs are withheld, the believer is invited to become sensitive to subtler movements, quiet whispers of encouragement, moments of unexpected peace, or the gentle unfolding of circumstance that might otherwise be overlooked. The waiting is a time of training the spiritual senses, learning to discern presence not through spectacle, but through stillness and subtlety. This discipline also fosters endurance, a quality much needed in a world where faith is often tested by hardship and delay. Endurance is the strength to hold fast when the road is long and the destination unclear. It is a quiet strength, not loud or boastful, but persistent and steady. Endurance through waiting is not about resignation or giving up. It is about continuing the journey with an open heart and steady step, even when the path is obscured. Waiting without signs can also be a time of deepened hope. Hope, unlike mere optimism, is not dependent on visible evidence, but is a confident expectation rooted in faith. It is the conviction that what is promised will come to pass, even if the timing and manner remain hidden. This hope carries the believer through the waiting, sustaining the spirit and keeping it from despair. It is a flame kindled in the darkness, not extinguished by the absence of light. The teaching that comes through waiting without signs is ultimately one of trust in a providence that transcends human understanding. It is an invitation to rest in the mystery rather than to demand clarity, to find peace in uncertainty rather than to be troubled by it. The waiting is a preparation, a refining process that shapes the heart to receive blessings not just in the form of signs or miracles, but in the deeper gift of an unwavering trust. This trust that emerges from waiting without signs is not a fragile thing, but a foundation for a faith that can weather storms, endure silence, and remain steadfast in the absence of proof. It is a trust that knows the value of patience, the power of hope, and the grace found in surrender. It is a trust that, when tested, is strengthened rather than weakened, growing more resilient with each day spent in quiet expectation. In this way, the discipline of waiting becomes not a trial to be endured, but a sacred opportunity for transformation, inviting the believer into a fuller, richer relationship with the unseen, where faith is not a fleeting response to signs, but a steady companion through all seasons of life. There is a subtle danger that creeps into the soul when faith becomes reliant on signs, those tangible proofs or extraordinary events that seem to confirm divine favor or presence. While it is natural to desire reassurance, a faith that depends on continual signs risks becoming fragile and conditional. It is a faith that stands or falls not on the unchanging character of God, but on fluctuating circumstances and sensory experiences. Such dependence can reduce the profound relationship between the believer and the divine to a mere transaction, where blessings are earned and trust is given only when the sign appears. This is not the faith that leads to transformation or deep spiritual maturity. Rather, it is a brittle faith, vulnerable to doubt when signs cease. To become dependent on signs is to place the measure of God's presence in the hands of external validation. This shifts the heart's focus away from the internal, invisible workings of grace to the fleeting and often unpredictable phenomena that may or may not occur. The soul begins to ask, where is the proof? Where is the evidence? And when the answer is silence or waiting, trust wavers and faith falters. The danger is that the believer's confidence becomes hostage to circumstances rather than anchored in the eternal. Signs, while powerful and sometimes necessary, are not the foundation of true faith. They are at best occasional aids that point toward a deeper reality. This sign dependence can also foster a kind of spiritual immaturity. When faith is built on signs, it rarely moves beyond the stage of needing constant reassurance. The soul remains like a child who will not venture forth unless held tightly by the hand. It is as if the believer requires a continual series of miracles to feel safe or convinced, rather than learning to walk in the dark by trust alone. This dependence stunts spiritual growth, for growth demands risk and uncertainty, qualities that are not compatible with the need for constant proof. Faith that clings to signs cannot develop the resilience necessary to endure silence or suffering. Moreover, the danger of sign dependence is that it transforms faith into a form of bargaining. The believer may come to expect that if they pray or obey, a sign will inevitably follow as a reward. This transactional mindset reduces the spiritual journey to a kind of ledger, where grace is counted and measured against evidence. Such an approach is deeply impoverishing, for it ignores the deeper mystery of grace given freely, not earned by merit or sustained by visible confirmation. True faith calls us to receive without conditions, to trust without demands, and to love without guarantees. Another consequence of relying on signs is that it can distort the perception of divine timing and purpose. Signs often come at unexpected times and in ways that defy human logic or desire. When the heart is fixated on signs, it tends to interpret absence as absence of care, or presence as confirmation of favor. This can lead to a simplistic understanding of divine interaction, where only what is spectacular or obvious is considered meaningful. The subtle, everyday workings of providence are overlooked, and the richness of spiritual life is diminished. The believer misses the quiet guidance, the gentle nudges, and the slow unfolding of grace that are often concealed behind ordinary moments. Sign dependence also introduces the risk of spiritual pride or jealousy. When signs are given, they can become objects of envy or cause comparison among believers. One may wonder why others receive visible confirmation while they do not, fostering resentment or doubt. This comparison detracts from the individuality of each person's journey and from the unique ways in which grace is given. The spiritual path is not uniform, and the presence or absence of signs is not the measure of one's standing before God. To depend on signs is to set oneself up for disappointment and division rather than unity and peace. Furthermore, the reliance on signs can cause a disconnection from the deeper, internal witness of the Spirit. The Christian life is marked by an inner transformation, a secret work of grace in the heart that may not produce visible signs, but bears fruit in character, love, and perseverance. When faith depends on signs, the soul can become deaf to this inner testimony, discounting the quiet assurance of the Spirit in favor of external proof. This diminishes the profound intimacy that is possible between the believer and the divine, which is not dependent on spectacle, but on the faithful presence that sustains in all things. The danger of sign dependence is also evident in how it can shape prayer and expectation. Prayer becomes a kind of petition aimed at securing signs, rather than a conversation grounded in trust and surrender. The believer may find themselves asking for proof, rather than opening their heart to the mystery of divine will. This narrows the horizon of faith, limiting it to what can be measured or witnessed, and leaving little room for the unknown or the hidden purposes of God. True prayer, however, is an act of faith that embraces uncertainty and rests in the knowledge that all things work together for good, even when signs are absent. This reliance on signs ultimately threatens the essence of spiritual freedom. To be free in faith is to be unshackled from the need for constant validation, to live without the compulsion to see before believing. Freedom comes when trust is rooted not in the fickle soil of signs, but in the unchanging foundation of God's character and promises. It is a freedom that allows the believer to walk confidently even in darkness, to rejoice even in silence, and to hope even without visible confirmation. It is important to remember that signs, when they come, serve a purpose. They encourage, they confirm, and they point toward the greater reality of God's presence, but they are never meant to be the whole or the foundation of faith. The spiritual journey invites the believer to move beyond signs, to a faith that stands firm in their absence, a faith that does not demand a sign before it will trust. This is the faith that endures trials, that perseveres in uncertainty, and that ultimately reflects the nature of the divine, steadfast, faithful, and unchanging regardless of human perception. When faith is liberated from the bondage of sign dependence, it flourishes. It becomes a living relationship that thrives in both the presence and the absence of visible proof, sustained by the knowledge that the divine is at work, even when unseen. This faith is robust and mature, capable of embracing mystery without fear, of enduring silence without despair, and of trusting without the need for a sign. There is a quiet assurance that comes with recognizing the presence of an unseen hand guiding the course of life. This reality, though invisible to the naked eye, is no less real for being hidden from our immediate perception. It is a truth that many have come to know not through signs or wonders, but through the steady unfolding of events that reveal a pattern beyond chance or coincidence. The invisible hand is that guiding force which works beneath the surface of our experiences, shaping outcomes and orchestrating circumstances in ways that may elude our understanding, but are deeply purposeful nonetheless. To acknowledge this invisible guidance is to embrace a profound humility, for it reminds us that we are not the ultimate masters of our fate. There is a sovereignty at work, a wisdom greater than our own, that arranges the pieces of our lives even when we cannot see the full picture. This invisible hand moves quietly, often unnoticed, yet with an intentionality that suggests care and design. It is not a distant force indifferent to human suffering or confusion, but a presence intimately involved in the details of each life. The challenge for the believer is to trust this invisible hand even when the evidence is scarce or contradictory. When the signs we hope for do not appear, or when circumstances seem confusing or difficult, it is this trust that sustains us. The visible world often appears chaotic or unjust, and the absence of clear signs can tempt us to despair or doubt. Yet the invisible hand continues to move, working things together in ways that are often revealed only in hindsight. This calls for a patience and faith that look beyond the immediate and the obvious, toward a deeper reality where nothing is wasted and everything serves a greater purpose. This unseen guidance also invites a posture of attentiveness and openness. To sense the movement of the invisible hand requires a subtlety of perception, a willingness to look beneath the surface of events and to listen to the quiet promptings of the heart. It is not an aggressive or forceful presence, but a gentle and persistent one, leading softly rather than shouting. Recognizing this presence asks us to be still and attentive, to cultivate an inner sensitivity that can discern the direction of a guidance that does not announce itself with fanfare, but whispers through circumstance and intuition. There is also an element of mystery here, for the invisible hand operates according to principles and purposes that may forever elude our full comprehension. This mystery is not a barrier to faith, but part of its beauty, inviting us into a journey that transcends human understanding. The invisible hand works in the tension between freedom and providence, weaving together human choices and divine purposes in a tapestry that is both intricate and harmonious. To trust this guidance is to accept that some things must remain unknown, and that faith itself is the courage to move forward without the comfort of complete knowledge. This recognition challenges the modern tendency to demand control and certainty in all things. It reminds us that control is often an illusion, and that true wisdom lies in surrendering to a guidance greater than ourselves. The invisible hand teaches us that surrender is not defeat, but a form of strength, a recognition that we participate in a story larger than our own. This surrender frees us from the anxiety of needing to see every step clearly, and invites us into a trust that is steady even when the path is obscured. In the experience of many who have walked the path of faith, the invisible hand reveals itself most clearly in retrospect. Looking back, the seemingly random or painful moments fall into place, like pieces of a puzzle, showing a coherence and purpose that was hidden in the moment. This retrospective clarity is a source of comfort and encouragement, affirming the reality of an active presence that guides even through difficulty. It is a reminder that absence of immediate signs is not absence of care or direction. To live with an awareness of the invisible hand is to adopt a new posture toward life itself. It calls for trust in the unseen, patience in uncertainty, and courage in the face of the unknown. It invites the believer to let go of the need for constant reassurance through signs, and to find a steadiness rooted in the character and faithfulness of the one who leads. This steadiness is not passive resignation, but an active waiting, a readiness to follow wherever the unseen hand may guide. Moreover, this unseen guidance often works through ordinary means, through relationships, circumstances, and subtle inner promptings, rather than spectacular miracles. This calls for discernment, for the ability to recognize the hand at work in the everyday, rather than only in extraordinary events. The believer learns to see providence in the small mercies, in doors opening or closing, in opportunities and obstacles alike. The invisible hand does not always act in ways that meet our expectations, but it is always at work in ways that are good and purposeful. This awareness of the invisible hand can transform the way one experiences suffering and difficulty. When trials come, they may seem random or unjust, but through the lens of faith, they become part of the guiding hand's work to shape and refine. The invisible hand is not necessarily a rescuer who removes hardship, but a guide who leads through it, using even suffering to draw the soul closer to its true home. This perspective does not minimize pain, but reframes it within a larger story where nothing is wasted. Trusting the invisible hand also deepens the relational nature of faith. It is not a trust in an abstract principle, but in a living presence who cares and guides. This presence is close, personal, and attentive, leading with wisdom and love. To sense this hand is to know that one is not alone in the journey, even when the path is dark and uncertain. In this way, the reality of the invisible hand invites a continual turning of the heart toward trust. It challenges the desire for signs and proofs and calls instead for a steady reliance on a presence that is always near, even when unseen. This trust transforms the believer's experience of life, infusing it with peace and hope that do not depend on circumstance, but rest in the certainty of a guiding hand that never lets go. There is a profound difficulty in learning to trust timing that is not our own. The human heart, eager for resolution and clarity, often chafes against the delays and silences that stretch across its waiting. We want answers now, solutions that come swiftly, and signs that appear on our schedule rather than on some inscrutable timetable. Yet the deeper lessons of faith are frequently found in the patient acceptance of divine timing, a rhythm that does not conform to our desires or expectations, but moves according to a wisdom far beyond our grasp. This trust in timing that is not our own is a central challenge in the spiritual life, one that tests the very foundation of our belief and teaches us about the nature of grace and providence. To trust in divine timing is to acknowledge that there is a plan unfolding according to a purpose not immediately apparent. It is to embrace the reality that the moments of waiting, delay, and apparent inactivity are not empty voids, but integral parts of a larger story. In this story, time itself is not a linear progression from problem to solution, but a tapestry woven with patience, growth, and transformation. The delay is not merely an obstacle, but a space in which the soul is prepared for what is to come. A sacred pause, where character is refined and hope is tested and strengthened. This trust requires a surrender of our own schedules and control, a letting go of the urge to dictate when and how things must happen. It is a surrender, not of passivity, but of active acceptance, a willingness to yield to the flow of a divine rhythm that is steady and sure, even when it feels slow or mysterious. This yielding is one of the hardest acts of faith because it goes against the very instincts of a culture that prizes immediacy and quick results. Yet those who learn this surrender find themselves living in a peace that surpasses understanding, a peace born of resting in the assurance that everything unfolds in the right time. There is also a wisdom in divine timing that protects us from premature answers or incomplete resolutions. Sometimes, if our prayers or desires were answered immediately, we might not be ready for the fullness of the blessing or the lesson embedded in the waiting. Timing ensures that the fruit comes in its season, mature and fully formed, rather than rushed or half-grown. This can be difficult to accept, especially when the waiting feels long or the silence heavy. Yet it is often only through the patient endurance of time that the fullness of grace is realized. The experience of divine timing invites us to see time itself differently, not as an enemy to be overcome or a barrier to be broken, but as a companion on the journey. Each season has its purpose, moments of action and moments of stillness, times of joy and times of trial, periods of clarity and times of uncertainty. To trust in divine timing is to learn to live faithfully in each of these seasons, knowing that none is wasted and all contribute to the shaping of the soul. This trust transforms waiting from a state of frustration into an opportunity for growth. Moreover, trusting divine timing encourages a focus on the present moment rather than a preoccupation with the future or regret over the past. The present is where faith must live and breathe, where trust must be exercised. When we fixate on when a sign will come or when an answer will be given, we risk missing the grace that is already at work around us. Divine timing invites us to embrace the now, to find meaning and purpose in the present, even as we wait for what is yet to come. It teaches that the present moment, with all its uncertainties, is a gift and a place where trust can deepen. This trust also shapes the way we pray and hope. Prayer becomes less a demand for immediate results and more a conversation rooted in patience and expectation. It is a prayer that says, "Not my will, but yours," acknowledging that timing is part of the divine will and that the right moment will come in God's good time. This kind of prayer is a surrender that opens the heart to whatever timing may bring, whether swift deliverance or prolonged waiting. It is a prayer that reflects trust in the unseen hand, guiding all things toward their appointed season. There is a certain joy and freedom in learning to trust divine timing. It releases the soul from the anxiety of needing to know the when and how, and invites a deeper confidence in the faithfulness of the one who controls time itself. This freedom is not an escape from reality, but a grounded peace that holds firm amid uncertainty. It allows the believer to move forward with hope, even when the path is unclear, and to rest in the assurance that the unfolding of life's events is held securely in loving hands. Trust in divine timing also guards against discouragement and despair. When answers or signs are delayed, it is easy to become discouraged or to question the presence and care of God. Yet this trust reminds the soul that delay does not mean denial, that absence of a sign is not absence of love or involvement. The waiting period is a testament to faith's endurance rather than its failure, a season that reveals the depth and sincerity of trust. In the spiritual journey, there are countless stories of those who have waited long and well, their faith tested and refined through seasons of apparent silence. These stories inspire and encourage, showing that divine timing is never accidental but purposeful, always aimed at the ultimate good of the soul. They teach that the right moment will come, not by human calculation, but by the wisdom of a timing that is perfect in its own way. To live by this trust is to embrace a paradox, that sometimes what seems like delay is actually a divine acceleration of growth, that waiting can be an act of faith greater than immediate response. It is to learn that faith is not primarily about receiving signs or answers, but about resting in the certainty that all things happen in their appointed time, under the care of a providence that never errs. Faith beyond evidence is a concept that challenges the very instinct of human reason and the natural desire for proof. It invites the believer into a realm where trust is not contingent on visible confirmation, where the heart must walk boldly into the unknown without the comfort of a sign or a guarantee. This kind of faith is not blind in the sense of being irrational or unthinking, but it is a deliberate choice to rely on a reality that transcends the immediate and the tangible. It is a faith that recognizes the limits of human perception and embraces the mystery that lies at the heart of divine encounter. The natural human inclination is to seek evidence before committing belief. It is a reasonable and often necessary stance in everyday life. Proof and confirmation provide security and prevent error. Yet, the spiritual journey calls for a different posture, one that accepts that not all truths are accessible through senses or logic alone. The life of faith is an invitation to move beyond the surface of things, to trust in what cannot be fully seen or measured. This movement beyond evidence is not a rejection of reason, but an expansion of it, recognizing that the deepest realities often lie hidden beneath what the eye can perceive. This faith beyond evidence requires courage, for it asks the believer to lean into uncertainty and to hold fast when all visible supports are absent. It is a faith that says, I will trust even when I do not see. And in doing so, it enters into a space of vulnerability. There is a risk in such faith, for without signs, doubt can creep in and fear can arise. Yet it is precisely in the absence of proof that faith is most precious and potent, because it is chosen freely and deliberately rather than compelled by circumstance. Moreover, faith beyond evidence allows for a relationship with the divine that is deeply personal and authentic. When faith is based solely on signs or wonders, there is a danger that the relationship becomes dependent on spectacle or external validation. But when faith chooses to trust without evidence, it moves toward a trust grounded in the character and promise of God, rather than in transient experiences. This trust is enduring because it is not built on shifting sands, but on the rock of a reliable nature. This kind of faith also reframes the experience of doubt and questioning. Doubt is not the enemy of faith, but a natural companion on the journey. Faith beyond evidence does not deny doubt, but embraces it, allowing space for honest wrestling with uncertainty. In fact, such wrestling can deepen faith, making it more robust and mature. The presence of doubt highlights that faith is a conscious decision, an act of will, as much as of feeling or intellect. It is a faith that can say, "I do not understand, and yet I choose to believe." Faith beyond evidence also guards against the temptation to manipulate or control spiritual experiences. When faith demands signs, there is a risk of reducing God to a cosmic vending machine where prayers become transactions and miracles are expected on demand. But faith that goes beyond evidence rests in a surrender that frees the believer from such expectations. It allows for a trust that is patient and open, not conditional or demand. This freedom is essential for a genuine encounter with grace. The absence of signs can be a fertile ground for spiritual growth. Without the distraction or assurance of visible proof, the believer is invited to develop an intimacy with God that is not reliant on sensory confirmation. This intimacy is often quiet and hidden, cultivated in the small acts of obedience, in moments of prayer that go unanswered, and in the daily perseverance of trust. It is a faith that flourishes in the dark, like a root system growing deep beneath the soil, unseen but strong. Faith beyond evidence also teaches humility. It reminds us that human understanding is limited and that the divine often operates in ways beyond our comprehension. This humility opens the heart to mystery and wonder, qualities that enrich the spiritual life. It prevents the arrogance of presuming that all must be made clear or that signs should always be given on demand. Instead, it cultivates a reverence for the unknown and a willingness to rest in the light of a truth that surpasses human insight. There is a profound joy in embracing faith beyond evidence. It is a joy that does not depend on circumstances, but flows from a deep confidence in a presence that sustains and loves unconditionally. This joy is not fleeting or superficial, but enduring, born of trust in what is eternal rather than what is temporary. It is a peace that transcends the need for reassurance and rests securely in the heart's quiet certainty. Furthermore, this faith invites the believer into a community of shared trust. It connects those who have learned to live without signs, who have walked through seasons of silence and uncertainty, and who continue to believe. This community is a witness to the strength and beauty of faith that does not require evidence, but flourishes in grace. It is a fellowship that encourages perseverance and offers support for those struggling with doubt or waiting for clarity. Faith beyond evidence also challenges the culture of immediacy and certainty that dominates much of contemporary life. In a world where everything is expected to be instant and visible, choosing to trust without signs is countercultural and radical. It is an act of rebellion against the demand for constant proof, and a declaration that some truths are deeper and more lasting than what can be immediately verified. This faith points to a kingdom where faith, hope, and love reign beyond the realm of sight, and where the unseen reality shapes the visible world. To live in faith beyond evidence is to participate in a spiritual journey marked by trust that is profound and transformative. It is to walk by faith and not by sight, to embrace the mystery of the unseen and to rest in the assurance of a love that is not dependent on signs. It is a faith that moves beyond the need for proof and rests confidently in the goodness and faithfulness of God, even when the eyes cannot see and the heart is uncertain. In the quiet moments when no sign is given, when answers seem delayed and the way forward is hidden, we are invited into a deeper trust, one that does not depend on the visible but rests firmly on the invisible. This trust is not born of certainty but of surrender. It calls us to lean into the mystery with a heart unshaken by absence or silence. It teaches us that faith is not a fragile thing that crumbles without proof, but a steadfast companion that walks with us through shadow and light alike. To trust without a sign is to embrace the reality of an unseen hand gently guiding our steps, to accept that divine timing unfolds beyond our grasp, and to live courageously in the tension between doubt and belief. It is to grow beyond the need for constant confirmation, finding strength in the quiet assurance that the one who leads us is faithful and unchanging. In this faith beyond evidence, we discover a freedom and peace that surpass all understanding, a faith that endures, transforms, and ultimately brings us into the fullness of grace. May we then learn to trust, not in what we see or understand, but in the one who knows the way, even when the path is dark. For it is in this trust, without sign or spectacle, that our souls are truly made whole and our journey finds its deepest meaning.